Right at 2, I learned something from the Harvard Business Review that you should be starting meetings right on time. And when you end early, never to tell people that they're getting their life back, because that just means that you've wasted their time for 45 minutes. So I'm trying to remember that, because that seems like things you say. Yeah.
Definitely said that. I'll try to scrub it from my learn something new today.
There you go.
Reminder.
Well, everyone, it's 2 o'clock. I'm sure we'll have more people log on as we go along. I know people are going like Star Trek, beaming from place to place at this point. I see that Shelley has pressed record, so we are recording the webinar. If you ever want to go back and watch it. Let me say welcome to everybody and talk about the webinar for today, which is retaining rural businesses through conversions to employee cooperatives. Our speakers are going to be Michael Darger of University of Minnesota Extension. Michael is a community economics specialist for the University of Minnesota Extension Center for Community Vitality. He manages Extension's business retention and expansion programs and served as the principal investigator for the Retaining Rural Businesses Through Employee Ownership project in Wisconsin and Minnesota. Our next speaker is also going to be Courtney Berner of the University of Wisconsin Center for Cooperatives. Courtney joined the University of Wisconsin Center for Cooperatives in 2011 and served as a cooperative development specialist until assuming the role of executive director in January 2018. Courtney develops research, outreach, and education programs on cooperatives and provides support to new and established cooperatives in a wide range of industries. And of course, Kevin Edberg of Cooperative Development Services, I cannot speak today, will also be a speaker. And Kevin is the Executive Director of Cooperative Development Services, a 35-year plus nonprofit that supports startup and expansion of cooperatives in multiple economic sectors in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa. And so thank you to our 3 speakers who are going to be talking about this really fascinating subject. Before I let you go, though, to have them speak, I want to remind you that March 10th is our next webinar, which is about how can communities address the Great Resignation and work-ready life skills curriculum preps applicants for job openings around the country. We try to get them to pare down their title, but it still seems pretty long. Maybe we should make it a tweet next time to make sure people have the shorter titles. But anyway, this is going to be a fascinating webinar on workforce and the trends that we're seeing today. So very timely topic. And with that, I welcome everybody again, and I give it to our presenters.
Thanks, Maria, and also thanks to Shelley and Renee for hosting. And I won't be able to make that next webinar, Maria, but that sounds great. And I'm glad you're recording these. So good afternoon, everybody. At least it's afternoon here. And we are excited to present about this project, which we called Retaining Rural Businesses by Transitioning to Cooperative Ownership. And again, it was a partnership between the two land grants and a nonprofit in the case of Kevin's organization. It was a nice little collaboration. Thanks for those introductions, Maria. So I'm going to spend the first several slides just kind of setting the stage and talking about resources and the bigger picture of where worker cooperative conversions fit in the business succession and transition space. And then Courtney will drill down deep on this whole idea of converting traditionally owned businesses to employee owned or worker cooperatives. And then I'll take it back and bring it home, drawing back the camera and talking about resources and organizations. And Kevin is here to make sure we get it right, because we're just going to keep it a 2-ring circus, and Kevin will be around for a Q&A. We will prefer to have our questions at the end, but feel free to chat them in along the way, and we'll begin. So we received this grant from Michigan State when they were operating the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development. So our appreciation to Michigan State on the front end and here to Purdue on the back end of the project. The 3 deliverables were to develop a curriculum and supplemental materials for both a whirlwind roadshow along the Minnesota-Wisconsin border and recorded webinars. And we already did one recorded webinar through a University of Minnesota series year in 2020. And we also have a public website, which is curated at Courtney's website. So it has been a nice collaboration. And, you know, we got lost a little bit in the shuffle between, you know, the change from Michigan State to Purdue. So this project happened about 2 years ago, but, you know, we're happy to share now. So thanks, Purdue, for inviting us in. And one other big change besides something called COVID-19 that has happened since we conceived of this project was that we now have these centers for employee ownership. And in Minnesota, we have the Minnesota Center for Employee Ownership, which started a year or so ago. And Sue Crockett might be with us today. And then Courtney's on the board of the emerging Wisconsin Center for Employee Ownership. And many of your states in the North Central or rest of the country have such centers online right now or emerging. So in a nutshell, we did the project, and in the very first week of March of 2020, we did this whirlwind 9-stop roadshow from Duluth through Hayward down to the midsection. We had one that was in the Twin Cities metropolitan area, and we had several on the Wisconsin and several on the Minnesota side, and finished up in Orinoco. And we engaged with at least 90 people who filled out the evaluations. We think it was a little bit more than that. And we had fun. It was a merry band of 4 of us for most of the presentations, although I think I did a solo on the very last sessions was me by my lonesome in Orinoco. But we were still talking to each other and having a good time and learning together at this merry band of roadshow people talking about worker co-ops. And we marketed the heck out of it. It was a partnership all along. And that was that. And then later that month, this little thing called COVID came along. So we're really kind of fortunate that we even got the thing in, because it was all predicated on face-to-face engagements. So this was basically our agenda for the sessions that we had with business owners and economic development and university people throughout the roadshow. We would welcome people, get them to introduce themselves. And we really had a nice mix of business owners, some employees of businesses who were thinking about buying through this worker cooperative idea, and a whole bunch of economic developers, university, local officials, audience. We talked about the potential in the region. Then we got into the nuts and bolts a little bit deeper than we'll go to today about what it is to convert a traditionally owned business to a cooperative, employee-owned cooperative. And then steps. Courtney will talk a little bit about that. And again, resources. And there's a bunch of resources available in our 2 states and in the rest of the North Central region. So you've all heard of the silver tsunami. It's not just coming, it's here. I mean, Kevin and I are boomers. We're younger boomers, but the older boomers, started turning 75 last year. The youngest boomers started turning 57 or 58 last year. And this is significant because, boomers still own about half or so of the employee or the businesses that have employees, employer businesses in America. And that's true in Wisconsin, Minnesota. I'm sure it's true in your states. And you can find out more with this info resource that we have. It is not just about boomers, but we think baby boomer held businesses are the center of the bell curve. And that's where most of the action is. But any business in any age cohort should be thinking about their exit strategy. That's just the basic part of running a good business, not just being in the business, but working on the business, as our partner here and who teaches a course with us likes to say. So then there's the COVID, right? So it's been very much a business retention moment. And we think worker cooperatives are one way to help retain rural businesses across America and in North Central. So I referred to that resource. This is from Project Equity, which is a great national resource. And I chose on the United States map, I chose Courtney's state, Wisconsin. And what it shows here, when you select Wisconsin at this map, they are saying there's about 50,000 businesses held by owners who are 55 or older. So boomers and the generation before boomers. And if you look further, it shows that the very light yellow is what they call is the category of professional services. The darker yellow would be retail. The light blue is construction. So you get the sense of the segments within this 50,000 businesses that are, they're not going to be around forever unless there's a business succession planning. So that's a nice national resource. Now, some states, and I'm lucky because I'm in Minnesota, and our Minnesota Center for Employee Ownership has contracted with the Project Equity. And so you can drill down to each county in Minnesota. And it's a pretty well-constructed website. It's using national data sources. They extrapolate, but they're saying, just like Wisconsin, we have about 50,000 businesses that are in this demographic. But if you go to any of these counties, like Hennepin County, where I live, is around 50, 51%. But the rest of the counties in Minnesota are between 36 and 70% businesses held by 55 plus. So this is both an opportunity and kind of a dangerous moment if we don't try to keep as many of these businesses as possible. So thank you, Project Equity, and the local centers like the Minnesota Center. So another related aspect of admiring the problem here is that most of these businesses are not necessarily doing something formally. They're, the majority of small businesses are reporting between 60 to 80% that they're not formally doing written business succession planning. And I see that in the program I run here for Minnesota Extension, where we only see 25 to 30-something% of the businesses admit to planning for business succession in our generic kind of all sorts of businesses, across all the age groups. And we see that from Minnesota Chamber and other data sources too. So the bottom line, of course, is that lack of succession planning by these business owners will lead to the loss or relocation of not only thousands of jobs, but also the businesses and all the benefits that they bring. So it brings instability to our north central local economies and beyond. So what can we do about it? If you look at the column on the left here, these would be the happy outcomes, and the column on the right would be the less happy outcomes. So if the business successfully transitions, then there's 4 basic categories, and keeping it in the family, a direct sale, a gift, or a trust to keep it in the family of business ownership. And there are family business centers across the country. Here in Minnesota, we have the University of St. Thomas that has a family business center, and they concentrate on family business issues. Selling to an outside interest. It could be a stranger, it could be someone from across town, but this would be, more of a traditional sale. And there's brokers out there and different people available to help make this exchange happen. Management buyout, selling to the manager of your business or the management team. This could be associated with an ESOP, which is a employee stock ownership plan, and we'll talk about that in a bit. Or it could be a sale to the employees through one of 3 forms. We're going to drill down about worker co-ops here today, but there's also these ESOPs, and there's something new in North Central country. We haven't seen it yet in Minnesota. It's called the Employee Ownership Trust. And rumor has it that we might get one of these EOTs here later this year. I hope so, because I want to see this thing. I want as many channels available for employee ownership as possible. But on the right column, this is if the business is not successful. It either liquidates or it's sold off in parts. But either way, you lose that thing in your local community or your regional economy that is an establishment with all the jobs and economic impact and goods and services and all the rest of the intangibles, tax base, and less tangible things that comes from having these rural business establishments. So we're seeing employee ownership is on the rise. I mentioned these new centers for employee ownership across the country. And Sue Crockett is a colleague of mine, and it's just really good to have for Kevin and I to have her here and to be able to, kind of refer people to her and vice versa. So we're seeing it in the news, and we're seeing it in foundations and municipalities. And again, we'll see more about some of these resources later. But to go down this worker cooperative pathway, which the grant was about, we think, and we did think, that Minnesota and Wisconsin, and really the rest of the North Central region, are well positioned. This is a map from Courtney's shop that shows density of co-ops of all types across America. And you see that the upper Midwest is just full of cooperatives of all types. Courtney's going to talk a little bit about co-ops in general. But this is rich country for using a cooperative approach. So some of the benefits of employee ownership in general, it can be a financially rewarding exit path with potential tax benefits for the selling owner. We won't go into details on that. That's complicated, but they are there in the IRS regulations. It can be a lasting legacy for that selling owner to keep that business in the community. And we think it's more likely with employee ownership that the business will stay in the community of origin than with other forms. Rewarding the employees for their role in building the business. And then the potential to increase not only the business's performance, but the performance of employees, their productivity, and retaining them, making them have a piece of the rock. And finally, again, what's the value of having a business in a community? Services, jobs, wealth, tax base. We think that employee ownership, no matter which pathway, is more likely to retain businesses locally. So just quickly about the two other paths for employee ownership. ESOPs. ESOPs, again, employee stock ownership plans. These are, I'm sure most of you know about these, and there's some quite famous businesses in this category in just about every state, including our two states. But it is a federally governed benefit plan. It's governed under the retirement plans, ERISA. And so this is, it's regulated, and it's got both the benefits and the costs associated with that. But when an ESOP is created, the business sells either all or some of their shares to a trust, ESOP trust, which owns those shares on behalf of the employees. The leadership of the business doesn't necessarily change right up front. It can change over time. But many ESOPs, not all, have what we call ownership cultures that encourage the employees to think and act like owners, and some probably more than others. I'm not an ESOP expert, but Sue Crockett and some of the other people here are, so talk to them. But again, there's these Section 1042 tax benefits. They're quite complicated, but they're real. So talk to your CPA or your tax expert, because those are part of the deal with ESOPs. Now, this whole thing with EOTs, employee ownership trusts. These are coming in from the coasts. I think they're on both coasts of the United States, and they also are quite big in Great Britain, but they're not yet here in North Central country. I'm hoping again to see one in Minnesota if my colleague at Nexus Community Partners is correct. But this is where the company is put into trust. It's held by a perpetual trust. All the excess profits go to the employees. It preserves the employee ownership for both the current generation and future generations of workers. And it's intended to improve the lives of the workers with a workplace culture that's where everyone's a co-owner from the first day on the job to the last. Unlike ESOPs, the employees do not build a retirement nest egg in the business. However, an EOT-owned company could do traditional retirement plans, such as a diversified 401k plan. So this can help avoid the risk of employees having too much of their retirement portfolio invested in one company, i.e. their employer. It does not have the tax benefits of ESOP, but it's much less expensive to create and administer than ESOPs. And it is basically under the section of the law for trust law. So it's about what did that, instead of the fiduciary responsibility that an ESOP has, it under the ERISA and the benefit law, this is under trust law. So it's what was that business owner intending when they created the EOT? So it's a whole different part of the law, and that can affect the ability for the business to navigate compared to ESOPs. And each one of them is different. Co-ops, worker co-ops are under the co-op law. So with that, we will now turn it over to Courtney, who's going to talk deep about the worker cooperatives.
Thanks so much, Michael. So just a couple of quick comments before I dive into co-ops, a little bit of additional framing on our roadshow. So our center had been doing some programming prior to the roadshow on employee ownership as a succession strategy. And most of the events we held in or close to Madison, Wisconsin, and sort of we're trying to pull people in. And so this roadshow, when we were approached by Kevin and Michael with the idea of putting together a proposal. Really, the idea of the roadshow was to meet people where they are in rural communities and to leverage the connections that local partners had. One of the challenging things that we have found at our center of sort of building our pipeline of businesses interested in converting to employee ownership, and for us, it's worker cooperatives that we're supporting, is that we don't have a lot of connections as the Center for Cooperatives with business owners. Why would we? And so our challenge is connecting with and getting in front of people who do. And so one of the great things about going out into communities and, again, leveraging the networks of those local partners, whether it's chambers or economic development organizations, folks in extension, is that they do have relationships with business owners. They do have relationships with the accountants and the bankers who are supporting and working with those business owners. So it was sort of this twofold opportunity to try something different in terms of getting this message out, this option of employee ownership. So I just wanted to share that before I dove deep, as Michael said, into co-op. So there have been surveys of consumers, and there's generally a sentiment amongst consumers that they would rather purchase something from a cooperative or do business with a cooperative. But when you drill down and ask them what a co-op is, they typically don't know the answer. So what the heck is a cooperative? Broadly speaking, a cooperative is a business that's owned and democratically controlled by the people or the entities that use its services. So a cooperative, instead of operating to maximize profit, it operates to maximize benefit to its members. So the people who use the cooperative, they own the co-op because they finance it in a variety of ways, and they share in both the business risks and the profits of the business. So members also democratically control their cooperative by exercising the right to vote, and that comes with membership. And the graphic that you're seeing here is, members elect the board hires and supervises management hires and supervises employees, who often are the people who are interacting most closely with members. So REI, largest consumer co-op in the US, in the news a lot right now. You might have caught some of those stories. And you walk into REI as a member, the person you're interacting with most typically is an employee in that business. So cooperatives, broadly speaking, cover a wide range of industries and cooperative types. So next slide, please, Michael. So there are, as I said, a large number of cooperatives here at the Center for Cooperatives. We often put them into buckets according to sort of their type or who owns them. So we have consumer co-ops, which are co-ops that consumers come together to get better pricing or access to goods. And the rural electric cooperatives are considered consumer co-ops. Grocery cooperatives, REI is one I just mentioned. Credit unions are consumer-owned financial services cooperatives. So consumer co-ops make up the largest group, the largest type of co-ops in the United States. We also have producer co-ops. Those are co-ops like Land O'Lakes, Ocean Spray, Sunkist, that are owned by farmers who collectively, they aggregate, market, maybe add value to their products through the cooperative. Purchasing cooperatives, one of my favorite types of cooperative, because they're kind of behind the scenes. They often, if you're in economic development, they're a good type of co-op to know about, because they often support those Main Street businesses that are maybe small, family owned, and are competing with larger competitors. So Ace Hardware, all the people who own little Ace Hardware stores around the country collectively own Ace Hardware. It's sort of as if the franchisees owned the franchise. So you see purchasing co-ops in a lot of industries where there's been consolidation and really pretty considerable competition. Multi-stakeholder cooperatives are cooperatives that combine two or more of these types of membership classes. So for just as an example, there is a grocery cooperative in North Carolina that's owned collectively by workers and by consumers. They share governance rights, they share profit. Both groups own the business. And lastly, worker cooperatives, which is what we're here to talk about today. If I could get the next slide, Michael. So worker cooperatives historically have been the smallest and continue to be the smallest sort of type of cooperative in the US. Prior to 2010, really only 1% of cooperatives started in the US were worker owned. And some research that we did in the last few years of looking at new cooperative formation across the United States. Interestingly, between 2016 and 2019, 47% of the new cooperatives that were started during that time were worker owned. So it's a huge shift. So again, still not a ton of businesses, but it's the interest in this model has expanded rapidly in the last decade. So what the heck are these? Michael's been referring to them as employee cooperatives. You're seeing here that I'm referring to them as worker cooperatives. Same thing, just different words, different ways of talking about the model. Essentially, worker cooperatives are co-ops that are owned by the workers. And in many ways, worker co-ops operate just like any conventional business. They develop a product or a service. They offer it for sale to the public. And their goal is to make enough money to support the business and its owners. So really, it's, if you had closed that loop on that graphic I showed you earlier of what is a co-op, you've got the employees, all or some subset of those employees are members of the cooperative, they own the cooperative. And then in a cooperative, worker co-op that has representational democracy, the members elect a board, and the board oversees management, and it goes around. You sort of connect that circle. So really, that's what a worker co-op is. The workers have much more say in the business. At the end of the year, if there is profit that can be distributed, it's distributed to the workers. Typically, in a cooperative, most co-ops have a one member, one vote structure. And so control is shared equally, but the members benefit based on their use of the cooperative. So what does use look like in a worker cooperative? It's really their labor. That's how they contribute, how they participate in the economic life of the cooperative. And so typically at the end of the year, if there is profit to be distributed, it's based on use, and use is tied to hours worked, although there's a lot of different ways. There's a lot of flexibility within the model. And the reason that we spent more of our time talking about worker cooperatives during the roadshow is it's there's a large industry of folks who support ESOPs already in place. And so there's a lot of support there. And so if it makes more sense for a company to convert to employee ownership via an ESOP, we know where to send them. Worker cooperatives tend to make more sense for companies that are a little smaller. ESOPs make more sense for large companies. Worker co-ops, while worker co-ops can certainly scale, ESOPs don't scale down very well because they are fairly expensive to maintain. So, all right, next slide, please. So this is a table that briefly compares worker cooperatives and ESOPs and some of the differences. I just alluded to some of the differences. One is that worker cooperatives are typically more appropriate for smaller businesses, fewer than 100 employees, although there are well-known examples of much larger worker-owned cooperatives in the United States and abroad. So that's certainly not a limit, but typically an ESOP doesn't make sense with fewer than 50 employees because of the high setup and maintenance costs. So again, Michael alluded to some of the differences here too. In a worker cooperative, it's about ownership. It's also about control. In an ESOP, it's really financial ownership and less so about control. There's something called democratic ESOPs that have been used, and that's been an attempt to bring some of the democratic control of the worker co-op world into the ESOP structure. In many cases, to really leverage that sense of ownership that you want employees to have when they're in an employee-owned business, whether it's a worker co-op or an ESOP. Another difference, key difference, is that in a worker cooperative, the workers own 100% of the business, and in an ESOP, there are companies that are 100% owned by the ESOP trust, but it is not a requirement. So you could have a company that has an ESOP and the ESOP only owns 10% of the business. It's not necessarily full ownership. All right, next slide, Michael. So I just want to talk about a couple examples. Sometimes it's easier to understand the concept if we, give you some businesses that have gone through this transition, we tell their stories. So Marion and Jesse Dunbar founded Happy Earth Cleaning in 2010. And initially, Marion was the only staff. She did all the cleaning, the management, and the client cultivation. In 2013, her husband, Jesse, joined the business. And Happy Earth now has 19 employees. So in 2018, Marion and Jesse decided they wanted to move back to their hometown of Seattle, Washington. As someone originally from the Pacific Northwest, I can hardly blame them. I have my days. Today is one of them, as there's like ice storming outside right now. And they realized that they would need to create a succession plan in order to exit the business. Marion had always had an interest in employee ownership, but wasn't exactly sure where to start. So they ended up connecting with the City of Minneapolis Co-op Technical Assistant Program, which Kevin and CDS are deeply involved with putting on each year. And they took this 9-week course that helped them understand co-op development. So they ended up moving through the process with the help of a $5,000 grant from CTAP. They work with Project Equity, which is the organization Michael mentioned earlier. Again, it takes a village here. There's the ecosystem approach. You'll see that in several of these examples. They also worked with Nexus Community Partners, which is another organization in Minnesota. And they together supported the transition of Happy Earth Cleaning to Happy Earth Cleaning Co-op. And the sale was financed through shared capital cooperatives. So there are a couple of CDFIs, that loan funds that provide financing to cooperative enterprises, and Shared Capital Cooperative is one of those, and it is in Minnesota. So the selling owners, this is an example of the selling owners not necessarily exiting the business to retire, but just wanting to do something different. And I would say that, a large, not all, but many of the businesses that we work with through transition. In fact, I'm tomorrow driving out to a vet clinic tomorrow to talk about selling to the employees. The owners don't actually want to exit right away, but they know they should be thinking about it and actually want to, it's a way to transition the business and prepare it for their eventual departure. All right, next slide, please. Snow River Cooperative is the most recent story of these. It is in Wisconsin, and it once again is certainly the beneficiary of our ecosystem approach. Kevin's organization, CDS, was involved. My organization, UW Center for Cooperatives, Shared Capital Cooperative, who I just mentioned, financed a portion of the deal. North Country Cooperative Development Fund. No, what foundation? Terrible. NCF. They also have supported this project. So this is a situation where there was a large business that the owner, he wanted to retire. He was going to liquidate. There was a division of that business that was very successful. And the manager of that division knew that it was very successful. And so initially worked with their union. So it's a unionized business and a unionized co-op now, to explore the possibility of the 8 employees of that division purchasing that division and running it as a worker-owned cooperative. It was a really quick, tight turnaround. Sometimes you have the luxury of business owners who are thinking years into the future. And sometimes when doing these deals, you have a business owner who wants to move to Florida yesterday, and you really have to hustle to get it done. But this is an example, both of a really great example of an ecosystem of support coming together. The union, a couple of nonprofits, Extension, University, us, CDFI. And so that was really great. And then this is an example where these workers have benefited deeply from not only keeping their jobs. This is a very rural place that's in Crandon, Wisconsin, northern Wisconsin, very rural, not a lot of jobs. Many of these folks have been in these jobs for 20, 30 years. So not only do they get to keep their jobs, but they also have reaped financial benefits, because this successful division is very successful. And they, I think in the second year, the board was they were able to give themselves a like $7 an hour raise and have pretty significant patronage dividends at the end of the year. All right, last example from Wisconsin, if I could get the next slide. Northwind Solar Co-op is actually a group. They attended one of our sessions early on when we were sort of touting the benefits of employee ownership conversions. the CEO of Northwind came to one of those sessions and was really inspired. And again, this is another example of someone not retiring, but setting themselves up, setting the business up that they founded to live well beyond, their tenure there. And in this case, the worker co-op model really aligned well with what they sort of other values that they held. So this is Northwind is a solar power system design and installation company located in Stevens Point. It was launched by Josh Stolzenberg and 3 other business partners. And in 2016, they began the process of transitioning out of a 4-member LLC into a worker cooperative. The co-op has grown its revenue and membership since completing the transition in April of 2017. They're doing a great job. And this was a project, they were pretty hands-off. They needed some support. I connected, I came in and talked to the employees, and then they worked with an attorney. But they've really stayed engaged with our center. They come to our trainings, and I did a board evaluation for them just last year. So another great example from a different industry from Central Wisconsin. All right, next slide. So we wanted, as Michael said, we're not going to go as deeply into this process as we did during our roadshow. You're not necessarily here to hear our presentation that we gave, but we wanted to give you a sense of sort of what this looks like, steps in the transition process. So when I first started doing this work, it was kind of new, and we were really learning as we went. And there's this whole, so we've talked a bit about the regional ecosystem, but the national ecosystem for employee ownership and these transitions has exploded in the last 10 years. So a lot of really good thinking has been done. New organizations have emerged to support these types of transitions. And this just gives you a sense of sort of the steps that we take people through. And sort of the cost is really dependent on the complexity of the business, a variety of other things. But wanted to give you a sense that there's been research on this. There's practice. There's like a lot of people that are thinking about this, and a ton of resources that we are happy to connect you with if you're interested in talking about employee ownership conversions with people in your communities. All right, next slide. I think it's back to you, Michael.
Yeah, good segue.
Okay.
Resources galore, and now there's more resources than there were when we conceived of this project with the North Central Center. So, just from Minnesota, we have Courtney's group, but we also have the Wisconsin Center that is emerging, that she's on the board of directors, Center for Employee Ownership, and there's this Madison Cooperative Development Coalition. So a good density of support there. In Minnesota, we have 2 Twin Cities-based entities. They've both been mentioned already, Kevin's group and Nexus Community Partners. And Nexus, Kevin's organization has held the USDA Rural Development Co-op Development Grant for several years, several funding cycles. Nexus is a newer organization that has done a lot of targeting of Black, Indigenous, and people of color on several fronts, including worker cooperative and wealth development. And it was nice to see them both be able to be part of that Happy Earth project that Courtney showed. And of course, there's that Minnesota Center for Employee Ownership, which is kind of an umbrella, for co-ops, EOTs, and ESOPs. And then nationally, we already saw the Project Equity resource, which is wonderful. But there's all sorts of other resources at these four organizations that are listed here and beyond. So they're there, and there's resources in your area too. But call one of us, Kevin, Courtney, or I, if you can't figure it out in your state, because I'm sure one of us knows someone there. So what can you do to help in this kind of ecosystem development for converting businesses to worker or employee cooperatives? And Sue Crockett tells me the correct word is worker cooperative, Courtney. And I thought that was interesting because in ESOP and in EOTs, they got the word employee, but in the worker co-op, it's kind of worker has become the word, but they're interchangeable, right? Worker or employee, there tends to be some popularity of certain terms, like you alluded to. So what you can do is first learn about this like you are today and go deeper and think about which businesses in your community might be suitable for conversion to either a cooperative or one of the other forms of employee ownership. sharing this information, sharing this opportunity with your colleagues, your clients, and others in the community will help build the word and building support by helping both owners and employees. Now, Margaret Bow, when I wasn't speaking, she was at one of our sessions, and she goes way back with co-ops. She came to our Black River Falls roadshow. So there's an actual participant here coming back. But she asked, like, how do you get through to employees? And that's a good question. Like, I put a response in the chat, and at the end we can have Kevin and Courtney chime in. But I think networks of business owners, you can get to them for several channels. But how do you get to employees? Or employees of small businesses? It's an interesting kind of communications question, I think. But because traditionally it's going to probably come from the business owner, but it could bubble up from the employee side in this particular case with employee ownership. So moving on, since we did this grant with North Central Center, this past year, my colleague John Bennett and I in Minnesota convened a bunch of players in the business succession and transition ecosystem, so to speak, including our state Department of Employment and Economic Development, which runs our state SBDC network, but also the Minnesota Center, Sue's group, and that Family to Business Center at St. Thomas, and our Minnesota Chamber. The Minnesota Chamber runs a unique business retention and assistance outreach program statewide. So all of them were interested, and we've been convening ever since. And one of the things that I learned through that sharing and comparing notes from the director of our SBDC network is that there needs to be more resources continuously available for business owners as they, when they finally arrive to the moment where, I better do something on this business succession thing. I keep getting people pinging me about it. So we developed a class at the University of Minnesota Extension, and it's not about worker cooperatives. It's just about business succession and transition writ large. And we're making this available publicly 3 times this year, 3 different sections, one starting in March. We also have sections starting in June and October, with the idea of trying to make this available and filling a gap, because in Minnesota, there really isn't anyone that was providing a kind of a neutral, middle of the road option that's both a public and private partnership. Because we have a private consulting partner who, in the lead instructor, has actually exited a business successfully. But then there's John and I bringing in the extension resources. And so if anyone in your area, business owner or an economic development type or business support professional, wants to take a class, we have it. Happy to talk to you about this class, and we're just trying to get some butts and seats. You know how that goes, because we don't, in our community economics team, we don't generally work with business owners. We work with intermediaries, economic developers, and state and county officials, chamber directors, planners, people like that. So anyways, this is a new resource that we developed because of what we learned by kind of being in community with other business succession and transition interested parties. BST, to shorten it to an acronym, it's a important, but it's a little bit invisible, right? It's a little bit of that iceberg below the waterline thing. So it's up to those of us like us on this call to recognize that and to try to make resources available as you can in your area. So that's what we wanted to talk about today. We didn't go as deep as we wanted to, but we wanted to leave time for Q&A and discussion. And so please chat in your questions. I'll leave our contact up there. And the website is under Courtney's name, where we posted the roadshow materials and PowerPoint and that other recorded webinar, I think, is up there. And that goes a little bit deeper into some of the process stuff that she left off for the sake of time here. So I don't know if Maria or Sarah wants to take back here, but
so there's a question from Erica in the chat. Thanks for the nice comment. Is there a minimum number of employees needed to make this model work? So at least in Wisconsin, the legal minimum number of members in a cooperative is 3. Otherwise, you essentially have a partnership. But so we've actually helped a couple conversions where there were only 3 founding employee owners or worker owners of the co-op. That's fine. It's not a very sustainable model. We've also, one of those eventually sold, one of the members left, and then you're down to 2. So I like to have at least, like 5 to 7 workers who are committed to being owners. One of the things that I tell the owners interested in selling to their employees as they're initially having those conversations with the employees is like, there's probably going to be a subset of the employees who are really interested right out of the gate, a subset who are not interested, and a subset who are kind of the wait and see. Let's see how these conversations unfold, and then might join in later. But I think in general, having a solid 5 to 7 is good, but legally in Wisconsin, at least it's 3. Kevin, I don't know if you have other thoughts on that. No.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, go ahead. Did you have a, Kevin?
No, there's just a certain amount of critical mass, having enough people to do all this stuff.
No. Also, I think depending on how many employees there are, a certain threshold. So, if it's a business that has 200 employees and there's 5 who are interested, that's probably not a great ratio. The model is quite flexible, and you can have, not everyone has to be a member. There are examples of co-ops where that's certainly the case, but having a certain minimum sort of threshold, a ratio of members to non-members is pretty common.
Yeah. So speaking of Kevin's going to jump in.
So, well, I'm sorry. There's another question about grocery stores that I'd be happy to respond to, but let's finish off this size conversation first.
Well, I was going to go to the rural grocery stores, and I was just going to say that, the rural grocery stores is an interesting phenomenon that's happening across the United States. And we actually have a group here in Extension in Minnesota who's focusing on that. So whether it's a rural co-op, a worker-owned co-op, or some other form of community-supported enterprise, which Norm Walzer has been doing a lot of research on CSEs or community-supported enterprises at his center there in Illinois. But I'll let keeping the rural grocery stores one way or the other, whether it's a worker cooperative or something else. But Kevin, what do you have on that?
Yeah, so most of the rural grocery work that I've been involved with has involved consumer ownership. And the idea is that particularly in grocery, you want to build demand for use of the product, use of the business, and that having broader ownership by the folks who are doing the purchasing, the use, is a more traditional approach. That's not to say it's impossible to have worker ownership. There might be those places where that works, and where it could be explored, but that's not typically the first or second conversation that I encounter when I deal with communities that are looking at grocery stores. All the ones that I have worked with have used consumer ownership.
You see the comment from Margaret about the Co-op Development Center in Nebraska, and I saw Charlotte was on here earlier.
Yeah, she is on there. I saw her name.
Yeah.
The first conversion I actually did, I cut my teeth in conversions with a rural grocery co-op. It was a rural grocery store that converted to consumer ownership. Unfortunately, it eventually closed, but it prolonged the access to a grocery store for, I want to say they stayed open for 5 to 7 years after the retiring business owners exited. So.
And IGA is a good example of a purchasing cooperative, Courtney?
It's not a worker co-op. It might be an ESOP, or it could be, there are some purchasing cooperatives in the grocery space that serve, well, there's one for other grocery co-ops, but I know that there's at least one that is a purchasing cooperative for small retail grocery stores, family owned.
Yeah, my understanding is that IGA is owned by the stores that it distributes to. So it's a purchasing co-op owned by folks that are purchasing through the IGA system. It's been around for a long time, so such that they have their own brand, the IGA brand. I think it originally stood for Independent Grocers Association. There are a number of grocery distributors that use that purchasing co-op model, and they're still significantly present in many parts of the U.S.
So I'm just going to throw a question to Kevin and Courtney, and that is, you showed a variety of businesses such as a solar power installer, a cleaning service, and then there was a pickle company in our roadshow presentation, a manufacturer. So any comments about what types of businesses or what sectors they're from besides the size for worker co-ops?
Kevin, you want to take that?
I'll take a stab. We're seeing in fact, there was a really good paper recently published about alignment of cooperative action in the solar industry, particularly in Colorado, that highlights cooperative action. And it seems to me that there's a cultural aspect that plays in here, that we're at an early enough stage where folks are looking they're looking for viable experiences of things that worked. And when they find something that works in a sector that's close to them, they say, oh, now I can see how this might work for us. And you do a compare and contrast, and they talk to the worker owners of the co-op that converted, et cetera, and that it spreads in that way, that folks talk to their colleagues within sectors, that when they see one or two or three that start popping up, it gains traction, and that's a promulgation strategy. So be watching for those. Aside from that, I do think that there's a sense of looking at those industries to see where cooperative action actually makes a difference, where ownership makes a difference. Home care, rural home care has been an area. Courtney's an expert on this far more than I, but the sense of, is there an opportunity to make somewhat more income, but maybe as or more important in some cases, is there an ability to have greater control over one's work life that provides an opportunity for cooperative action to make a difference via ownership? Low-wage industries are generally a challenge anywhere because there's just not enough margin to make a whole lot of things work. But sometimes there are non-tangible or non-financial benefits in that sense of controlling scheduling, controlling culture, controlling how the work gets done that can be meaningful. So I'd be thinking about those kinds of things with any example. But Courtney, you've got tons of experience there.
I mean, I agree with everything that you're saying. I think the only thing that comes to mind to add at this moment is thinking about places where folks who are marginalized might not have access to work. So whether it's using the co-op model to, an example here in Madison is there's a group of Latina immigrants who have formed a cooperative of doulas and community health workers. And so able to sort of create some income for themselves while also supporting the broader health of the broader community. Thinking about, so we are connected with the Madison Cooperative Development Coalition, which is a City of Madison funded initiative to create good jobs for people of color, disenfranchised communities, low-income workers through the worker cooperative model. And so my colleague Charity Schmidt has been working with like Worker Justice Wisconsin and like where are workers being abused in the system. So she's working with a group of painters. We've talked to roofers, which is an industry where workers are sometimes abused, and helping them, where not only might they improve pay through a worker cooperative, but conditions could also be greatly improved. So I would just add that.
So I'm curious on the conversions, what kind of culture or, I do a lot with exit, but usually it's family or the non-family, and there's a culture, certain cultures that kind of are good for being able to, because there's a certain level of transparency and things that need to happen. So what kind of cultures do you see kind of thrive in this environment, or lead to this environment, I should say?
It's a really important question. I'll just take a stab at it out of the gate here. It's an important question. And one of the things that we do when talking with groups is sort of understanding, like sort of like an ownership readiness assessment. And some businesses have a culture already where you come to understand that culture, at least some aspects of it. And you're like, oh, they're not going to have a hard time with this transition. There's any number of reasons that could be the case. And there are others where there are dynamics that where there's some infighting. I have been involved with some businesses where it became very clear that the business owners were sort of the peacekeepers amongst the employees, and that when they exited, there were just some weird dynamics. So it can be a make or break issue. One of the best things that I've seen owners do is when there's the blessing of a lot of time, a long off ramp for those owners, is really starting early, long before they say, hey, workers, do you want to buy this business from me? I'm out of here. Before they even share that they might be interested in employee ownership, how can you start to open up the books a little bit? How can you start to share responsibility? How can you cross train and do these things that are creating, because many of us have never been a boss, let alone even a business owner. And so slowly helping people move into a place where they feel more comfortable with that. So that's one part of ownership readiness. And then there's the dynamics between the people. And some of that is luck, some of that is training. But it is certainly a really important component to consider, beyond just when you're looking at these deals, it's not just assessing the financial feasibility or the legal feasibility, it's really also assessing what does the management transition look like? What does the governance transition look like? And how do we ready everyone involved to enter into a sort of different culture if that needs to take place for it to be successful?
I would echo what Courtney just said, that sense of, is there openness? Is there communication about what is the status of the business? Is there trust among workers and between workers and management? Just because a business becomes worker owned does not mean that the issues of management go away. In some cases, they might actually get more intensified because of who is now, how decisions get made and how authority is shared. So that whole sense of what is the agreement around how businesses will look like afterward, and what preparation is being done to plan to build those skills, create those communications pathways, explore those other topics, all as part of the pre-conversion step.
Yeah, for example, most worker cooperatives are not collectives. There still is a management structure. There still is a board. There still are formal channels, like people are workers and there's supervisors, and a collective would be the ultimate, like everyone's the boss. And that's probably not what we're talking about, although there are some of those around.
Great, thank you. There's 2 minutes to go. If somebody has a birdie question that can be answered in less than a minute or a minute or less, please unmute yourself and ask. Although I'm sure our guests would be happy to take your emails if you should need some more information. No, okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you to our wonderful speakers. This was so interesting. And it's part of some of the exit strategies we talk about to some of our clients. So this was fantastic. It is recorded. So if you want to go back and re-listen to some of the stuff, go ahead and you should get an email with the recording as well. And so we appreciate you guys being here. We'll see you March 10th for our next webinar, for those that didn't click out so quickly. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much, Maria and Shelley, for having us.
Mm-hmm.